From a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to stave off an embarrassing level of excitement and joy when your latest shopping trip scores the most advanced foot fungal cream. And now, the podcast host who has no need for such things because his feet look like they're straight out of the womb, Pete Dominic!
Oh, that is absolutely right, Pete Co. You have such a good memory about my baby-looking feet. Hello and welcome to show number 885. Can you believe it? Here we are, joined today by one of our favorites who's joined me as often probably as almost anybody else, Bill Boyle. Bill B in D.C. We've got plenty to talk about. I always love when he joins, and so many of you do as well. That's what I've got for you here on this Monday, the 10th of July. If you're listening on Monday, people listen at all different times. It's a podcast, you know, but I'm happy to have you whenever you're able to join. Just going to give a shout out to Matt Carlson, who's been on tour as a solo artist and has brought so many listeners together. He's performed at some of their homes and other venues where listeners have come out. And I just want to say how cool I think it is that so many people have gotten connected through the community that we've built as a result of the show. And it's really cool to see everybody going out and joining Matt and watching him perform and supporting him. He's going to be in Asheville, North Carolina tonight, Hawthorne, Florida on Tuesday. Wednesday, he'll be in Knoxville, and then in Kentucky on Friday. A lot of driving for Matty C, and so go out and support him. I just want to say how cool it's been to see so many people out there supporting him and connecting with each other. That is a wonderful, wonderful thing. I hope you had a great weekend. I'm very happy to have you joining me. I've got a great week of shows and guests planned for you. You never know what's going to happen. Sometimes people cancel. Sometimes I add more, but as of now, this week looks packed with brilliant folks that are going to be talking to me about a wide range of issues that matter to you, your family, your community, your country, and your planet. That's what we do here at Stand Up. Right now, I want to play a few clips for you and wrap up a little bit of news, and you can jump to my conversation with Bill Boyle if you want to skip the news, and that begins at about 10 minutes into the episode today. Want to acknowledge the extreme heat that is gripping much of the U.S., the Southwest, with crazy weather over the weekend in New York, where I live, as well as looks like it's going to be really hot this week. So that, of course, is one big story. President Biden arrived in Great Britain on Sunday, where he will meet with the King and Prime Minister before continuing to the NATO summit, a final stop at the new NATO new member Finland. He was also on the beach on Saturday in Delaware, where he has a home, and it was weird because he was just lying there in the sun on a beach, a public beach, where there were a lot of people. Anyway, I probably looked at that for like 10 minutes, all these pictures of President Biden on the beach. Really not that important, but I thought it was kind of funny to see him just lying there, an 80-year-old man just lying there in the sun. And then I got jealous. I was like, I haven't been to the beach in a while. All right, on to something more serious and consequential. Let's head to ABC News for some upsetting development in the state of Tennessee.
The federal court ruling for the first time clearing the way for a ban on gender-affirming care for people under 18. The court allowing the law in Tennessee to go into effect immediately. ABC's Mary Alice Parks is joining us in Washington with more. And Mary Alice, what's the impact now across the country?
Yeah, this ruling is unique, and the impact could be big. Several other courts across the country have said that similar bans in Arkansas, Alabama, and Florida could not go into effect because they could discriminate against transgender youth. But yesterday, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals saying that Tennessee's ban could go into effect, at least for now. The court is still reviewing the underlying case. This is a ban on hormone therapy and puberty blockers. The law in Tennessee prevents medical providers from beginning any new transition care, but also stopping treatments already underway. Now, we've seen across the country this big push from Republican-led state houses. They prioritize getting these sorts of bans on the books. 20 states have passed bans on this kind of care for minors.
All right. Hard to believe, but that is a top concern for Republicans across the country. A manufactured problem and a terrible tragedy for people who identify as trans, and just so unnecessary. But we are going to see more of that before it's over. That's for damn sure. All right, let's see what else. Elon Musk is the gift that keeps on giving to Mark Zuckerberg, who notched his biggest win from Elon Musk yet after years of trying and failing to capture Twitter's audience with copycat features. Mark Zuckerberg, according to CNN Business, is now capitalizing on Twitter's struggles with this new app, Threads. Are you on it? I'm on it. Are you there? Bill B's on it. Lots of people on it. Meta's Twitter clone launched this week to unprecedented success despite Meta's history of privacy violations, enabling election meddling, not to mention long-standing concerns that the company and Zuckerberg wield too much power over the social media mark. But I think that Christian Finnegan said it best on his last appearance on this show this past Saturday when he said this.
Elon Musk has done a lot of really despicable things over the last year, but I truly think for me, the single worst thing he has done is put me in the position where I have to be supportive of Mark Zuckerberg.
All right. Well, there you go. I thought that was just perfectly put. And of course, they continue to go at it, and I'll talk more about that with Bill B and DC coming up. But Threads is up to almost 100 million subscribers in just a few days. So join us over there, another evil social media network. What else? The Powerball jackpot is up to $650 million. Amazon Prime Day is upon us. Oh, here's something that's actually important and terrible. An Oklahoma judge, Oklahoma, terrible place, according to all the news I'm reading about their laws and representatives. An Oklahoma judge has thrown out a lawsuit seeking reparations for the 1921 Tulsa race massacre, dashing an effort to obtain some measure of legal justice by survivors of the deadly rampage. There are 3 over 100-year-old survivors of that horrible, horrible violence in Tulsa, and they are not going to get justice, it would seem, as of now. By the way, have you ever heard of this guy, Ryan Walters? He's the Oklahoma superintendent. He last week said that the Tulsa race massacre didn't have anything to do with race, that the individuals were not targeted because of their race, which, of course, is the opposite of the truth, the total opposite of the truth. I spent a lot of time thinking about his comments and how outrageous they were last week, and decided I didn't even want to bring it up. It was so triggering, but I have changed my mind. It's just a horrible, horrible situation as a result of this judge's decision. I think everybody's got to know about that one. And despite their being outlawed, the United States government, with the approval of the President of the United States, has approved the transferring of what are called cluster bombs for Ukraine to use in the war. Lots to know about these, and I opened my conversation with Bill and talk a lot with Bill Boyle about it. He actually supports the sale or transfer of these munitions to Ukraine. Our friend Michael Cohen apparently doesn't. I don't. I want more details. And I've got some context because I think this is a really important issue to talk about, the U.S. sending controversial cluster munitions to Ukraine. First, here's 2 minutes with White House National Security spokesman John Kirby on ABC's This Week with Martha Raddatz.
Okay, let's talk about the cluster munitions. The president made the decision to send cluster munitions. They are banned in so many places around the world, including most of our allies. Why send them to Ukraine?
Simple. This is about keeping Ukraine in the fight. You were just there. You talked to President Zelensky about the counteroffensive, and in some ways it's not going as fast as he would like. They are using artillery at a very accelerated rate, Martha, many thousands of rounds per day. This is literally a gunfight. In all along, from the Donbass all the way down towards Zaporizhia and Kherson. And so they're running out of inventory. We are trying to ramp up our production of the kind of artillery shells that they're using most. But that production rate is still not where we want it to be. So we're going to send these additional artillery shells that have cluster bomblets in them to help bridge the gap as we ramp up production of normal 155 artillery shells.
So you're sending those cluster munitions because we don't have enough of the kind of munitions they need.
That is right.
I want to ask you why the U.S. has never banned them before. I mean, they're obviously a threat to civilians if they don't explode. Why is the U.S. not banning them, period?
We are very mindful of the concerns about civilian casualties and unexploded ordnance being picked up by civilians or children and being hurt. Of course, we're mindful of that. And we're going to focus with Ukraine on demining efforts. In fact, we're doing it right now, and we will when war conditions permit. But these munitions do provide a useful battlefield capability. And I will remind that while Russia is using them in Ukraine in an aggressive war on another country and indiscriminately killing civilians, the Ukrainians will be using these cluster munitions, obviously, which have a very low dud rate, but they'll be using them to defend their own territory, hitting Russian positions. And I think we can all agree that more civilians have been and will continue to be killed by Russian forces with whether it's cluster munitions, drones, missile attacks, or just frontal assaults than will likely be hurt by the use of these cluster munitions fired at Russian positions inside Ukrainian territory.
All right, now here's another point of view. This is from Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and she was on CNN with Jake Tapper. And they played this clip of Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor to the president, for Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and then you'll hear her comments after. And then I'll jump right into my conversation with Bill Boyle.
There is also a massive risk of civilian harm if Russian troops and tanks roll over Ukrainian positions and take more Ukrainian territory and subjugate more Ukrainian civilians because Ukraine does not have enough artillery. That is intolerable to us. This is their country they're defending. These are their citizens they're protecting. And they are motivated to use any weapon system they have.
What do you think? Do you buy that argument? What's your response?
Nice being with you, Jake. No, cluster bombs should never be used. That's crossing the line. Once you see what takes place, we know what takes place in terms of cluster bombs being very dangerous to civilians. They don't always immediately explode. Children can step on them. That's a line we should not cross. I think the president's been doing a good job managing this war. This Putin aggressive war against Ukraine, but I think that this should not happen. He had to ask for a waiver under the Foreign Assistance Act just to do it, because we have been preventing the use of cluster bombs since, I believe, 2010.
So when Putin started using cluster bombs, the Biden White House said that would potentially be a war crime. Do you think that, therefore, the U.S. government, the Biden administration, will potentially be engaging in war crimes if this goes forward?
What I think is that we would risk losing our moral leadership, because when you look at the fact that over 120 countries have signed the Convention on cluster munitions, saying they should never be used, they should never be used. And in fact, many of us have urged the administration to sign on to this convention. And so I'm hoping that the administration would reconsider this, because these are very dangerous bombs. They're dangerous weapons. And this is a line that I don't believe we should cross.
All right. Well, now here to talk about cluster bombs and a lot more, the great Bill B. in D.C., who I was texting with over the weekend about this. Huge fan of cluster munitions. Must be making money off of them the way that you talk about them. Go ahead, sir. Hi.
Yeah, I store them in my parking garage.
You have them in your garage.
My side gig.
You're not worried about the dud rate.
No, the dud rate. So you just played Barbara Lee talking about this.
Yep.
And I have to immediately jump in and really push back super hard at what she said. Jake Tapper also is guilty of this in this particular instance, where they talk about cluster bombs. And I'll get to the sort of ins and outs of the practicalities of cluster bombs. But they talk about cluster bombs and they bring up war crimes, as if using cluster bombs in any instance is a war crime. That is not true. Cluster bombs are not illegal under international law. It is just that many countries, over 100 countries, have said they will not use them. Guess where countries tend, other than the United States, guess where countries that tend not to want to give up cluster bombs? They tend to be on the border of Russia. Okay. Cluster bombs are designed to stop a Warsaw Pact style armored attack of a bunch of guys in one place trying to punch through your lines. Countries that are afraid of Russia and know that Russia has that sort of doctrine have kept them. Using them in that instance is not a war crime at all, particularly if you're using it on self-defense and not using it against civilians. Using it against civilians is a war crime. Guess who's been using them on civilians all this whole war?
Well, using any weapon on
Russia.
civilians is a war crime.
But even more so, like it is cluster bombs using them on a civilian target is an egregious war crime. Ukraine has not done that, does not plan to do that, has already said that they will track where they're used. They won't use them against civilians. They won't use them in Russian territory. So there's a real problem with this whole debate in that it's presented as if the Russians are using poison gas and we're going to use poison gas. It's not that. These are conventional weapons that do have downstream effects that are bad. But a country has the right to defend itself, an attacked country by an imperialist colonial power, I think has a pretty broad range of things it can do to defend itself that are legitimate. And in this case, they're being attacked with cluster rounds. They are facing a shell famine. Both Ukraine and Russia are running low on shells. That's
what we heard from.
Shell famine is it's a term that came from the beginning of World War I, where for about a year the British couldn't make enough shells. And the Germans couldn't either. And so everybody, this is not a new thing.
Famine being used about bombs, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, maybe it's a little off, but this is not an unusual thing in a major war that's highly artillery dependent for the amounts of artillery shells to fluctuate during a war. Russia has used over 10 million shells, and it's a question how many they have left. Their fires have dropped a lot in the last couple of months. Ukraine is trying to launch an offensive, is running low on shells. There are shells of normal 152, 155 millimeter type that are coming down the road, but they're not done yet. And the full production hasn't caught up yet. So in order for us to help the Ukrainians continue this counteroffensive and hopefully win this counteroffensive, giving them these 300,000 or 400,000 artillery shells that we have could bridge them through back to normal conventional rounds. And I will point out, by the way, people think that these rounds are like miracle rounds. They're not. They're actually not very good for knocking guys out of trenches. These are not as good of a round as the round that they're replacing, okay, or that they are filling in for. So this is not any sort of like escalation. This is not any sort of war crime that's happening. This is a practical decision to do something that gets the Ukrainians solidly through this counteroffensive. And it gets us to, something else. The whole point of this, the whole point of using them is to shorten the war. People say, oh, well, children are going to be hit by these duds, and that will undoubtedly happen.
You think that'll undoubtedly happen, that innocent children will die as a result of these duds? You don't think they can go up and...
I 100% think that will happen, yes. What I also
and
know
you're still
is
advocating for their use.
Well, because what I already know is already happening is innocent children are already getting killed. People are being raped and murdered and killed by Russian shelling and killed by Russian missiles. We're not in a situation where if we don't use cluster rounds, fewer children are going to die. In fact, the likelihood is that if we don't use cluster rounds, more children are going to die.
Well, that would be a convincing argument if people believed it, and I don't know how you prove that.
I mean, I think that it's pretty clear. You could figure out what what cluster rounds have done in Afghanistan and other places. It's not kids aren't dying every day from cluster rounds in Afghanistan. Where they are dying every single day is in the bombings that Russia is launching against Odessa, against Kharkiv, against Lviv, against Kherson. I mean, there's no question that on things we can't mitigate, which is the Russians doing long-range attacks on civilian targets, people are dying, children are dying, babies are dying, women are dying. If the Ukrainians have a peace in their country and they will have the resources to really demine things, I would feel very strongly that that's something that we can control to a great degree and mitigate to a great degree.
Well,
but again, what we do know is that the death toll, we're not just talking about little kids, we're also talking about soldiers on the line. If we knock 4 months off the end of this war, we're saving 500 people a day on the Ukrainian side.
When you texted me, you used a World War II parallel about
De Gaulle.
De Gaulle. Want me to read what you wrote, or you want to just say it?
I'll just say it. So there was a big fight in the Allied High Command before D-Day. And Churchill was forced to go to de Gaulle, Charles de Gaulle, who was the head of the Free French, and talk to him about the Allied bombing campaign, because the Allies were bombing the crap out of France in order to make it more difficult for the Germans to reinforce the beaches we were about to invade. And Churchill, thought this was ridiculous. They're trying to win a war. But he went to de Gaulle and said, you are representing the French. How do you feel about this? And de Gaulle's reaction was kind of like, you're kidding, right? And his comment was, those people will be dying for France. And his meaning was, of course this is war. This sucks, but this is what happens in war. And do you want to, how many French are going to die if the Germans keep control of France? It's a loss. It's 100% a loss. But compared to what you're going to give up if you don't do it, it's a cost you have to accept. And by the way, if people want to go, oh, come on, that's bullshit. Like how many Frenchmen really died? 60,000 French civilians died from Allied bombing during World War II before D-Day. 60,000. We bombed the crap out of it. We bombed stockyards, rail yards, cities, everything. And were the French resentful of it after the war? No, they were not. They accept. You go to France now and you can find monuments to American soldiers and British soldiers everywhere you go. So
I mean, it was a different time and a different accuracy of the types of munitions that were being used, where there were more.
They were a lot less accurate.
Right.
They were much less accurate.
I'm saying, and it was more acceptable then to have accidents or as they call it, collateral damage, or civilians dying than using the precision weapons we have now.
Right. And by the way, these weapons are not going to be used. These are going to be used on the Russian side of the fight. Right. Ukraine's not going to be hitting cities full of people. They're not going to be knocking out trains with this stuff. This is going to be used directly against Russian units that are in the open. And that's it. So these are really aimed at military people. These are not aimed at bridges, rail yards, cities.
I'm not sure I'm convinced on this, but you make a very convincing argument. I want to move on to other aspects of the war. We haven't maybe been paying as much attention to the aftermath of the attempted coup, mutiny, whatever you want to call it. You certainly have. So what has happened in the last couple of weeks with the players and with the war itself? You heard the national security or who was it, John Kirby saying the counteroffensive isn't going as well as Zelensky would like it. So what's happening? How come they're not just kicking ass now that those Wagner guys are gone? I just don't understand that. They had thousands of soldiers there that were the most well-trained and equipped, and now they're gone. And I just assumed, like I have in many other times during this conflict, that the momentum would really pick up for the Ukrainians or other things.
So I would not say the momentum has slowed down for the Ukrainians. The movement on the front has never really taken off. But that's different from whether or not something dynamic is happening, right? What the Ukrainians are facing is layer upon layer of Russian defenses that are heavily, heavily mined. And I mean mined copiously everywhere you go, for tanks, for people, everything. And those minefields are covered by Russian artillery. So you get in a minefield, you start to clear the minefield, and then you get hit with artillery, and then you have to try to turn around to get out, and it's a mess and it's nasty. So what the Ukrainians have to do, because they don't have enough air power to suppress everything around them. First, you have to suppress the ability of the Russians to fire on a particular minefield you're going through. Number one. Number two, you have to then get through that minefield. And then number three, you got to go to the next one and do it again. And then next one and do it again until you are through all of their defenses. Well, to do that, I get back to the first thing I said. You have to suppress the ability of them to fire on you in the minefield. So you do something, there's a great term for it. It's called recon pull. Recon pull means you've got this long line of Russians, and the Russians are stretched out over this long line. And you attack at point A, point C, point D, point F. And you probe, you reconnaissance hard. And you force the Russians to start moving the reserves up. You force them to show their artillery. You force them to strain their logistics net. You force them to move guys around to plug the holes in. And what you do while you're doing that is you use things like cluster munitions to catch them on the move and kill them. And you do things like you use your American satellites to figure out where those artillery units are, and you knock them out. And the point is, it's corrosive. There's not some big, this isn't World War I and it's not World War II. It's not maneuver warfare. It's not trench warfare. It's something in the middle. And what Ukraine needs to do is corrode the Russian army's ability to operate its logistics, to move its men around, to be able to bring concentrated fire on the places Ukraine needs to punch through. Right. And it's a guy that I know who's a very smart military guy. He calls it fog eating snow. You know, you snows at night and it starts to warm up and there's all of a sudden fog everywhere and you can't see anything. And then the sun comes up in the morning and the snow's all gone. And you can't believe that much snow disappeared overnight. This is what the Ukrainians are doing. They are corroding the Russians' ability to function and to react and to move. And they're killing a hell of a lot of them, by the way, which is not something that a smaller force is supposed to be able to do on offense. But that's what's happening right now. This is still preparatory. Those big battalions, the 10 or 12 of them that they put together, that are big, offensive, fast, and can go a long way, they have not been used at all. Ukraine is using the guys that were there to wear the Russians down. And when they wear them down enough, and if they squeeze that system enough and they stretch it enough, at some point they're all of a sudden going to go, oh shit, the road right there is completely clear. Because the Russians just won't, they'll make a mistake. They won't have enough men. Somebody will walk away. I mean, remember, we're talking about the coup, which I will in a second. And you've got a Russian military where particular units don't trust each other. Some guys went for Gerasimov, some guys went for Prigozhin. You know, you have really bad, think about what that does for morale when there's been an almost coup
they
back
split the loyalties to different leadership.
That's right.
You couldn't ask for a better situation. It's like watching Michigan Republicans. They got in a fight over the weekend.
Right. And it's, yeah, exactly. But it's also, you watch the guys who are prosecuting the war on the Russian side most effectively are now sitting in a camp in Russia because they tried to launch a coup and it failed. And by the way, they're not being punished. So that's probably a good way to segue from
go
what
ahead.
I was just telling you.
Yeah.
What I was just telling you is where the war is. And I am very sanguine about it. I think it's a very smart way to do it because I don't give a shit if the Ukrainians break through in October or if they break through tomorrow. I want them to do it in a way that is the most effective for them. And it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things between now and the fall rains when they do it. So that being said, these guys are looking over their shoulders. Wagner tried to launch a coup. It's over in 3 days. Everyone says, oh man, this guy Prigozhin's a dead man. Wagner's going to get broken up. They're going to be sent to Africa. They're going to be sent home. They're going to be sent to Belarus. Here is what has happened. Prigozhin is cruising around untouched. He had something like $110 million in St. Petersburg, which was seized and put on television. In addition to the $110 million, he had gold bars, he had guns, he had everything else.
Wow. A
couple days later, he shows up alone with a lawyer with a writ at the FSB or whatever the office is that had it in St. Petersburg. And the lawyer holds the writ over and says, all of that is his. We have a truck waiting outside.
Really?
He was given all of it back.
Really?
Gerasimov, meanwhile, disappears. The guy who's the head of the Russian army.
One of the people that Prigozhin wanted gone.
One of the guys he wanted gone. Shoigu is out there, but he's being really low key. The Wagner guys, they keep all their arms and they don't go to Belarus. They go back to their bases near Voronezh, where they still sit and have announced that they're going to kind of take off until late August.
I saw that they're getting some R&R till the end of August.
And you saw my joke, right? Like you launch a coup and then you get to take the summer off. That's kind of a weird way to lose a coup. And then today they announced that Gerasimov is being fired. So you had a guy who really came close to having people fighting in the streets in Moscow, who has said that the reason the war began in Ukraine was bullshit, who has said that the people running the war are assholes and they're terrible, who has said that Putin needs to go in various ways, not super bluntly, but he said it, who has shot down 13 Russian airplanes, killed 32 Russian Air Force guys, created incredible rifts in the Russian army. Seems like things are going okay for him.
Right.
And what does that tell you? Like when I say all that to you, what does that tell you?
Putin is weak.
Putin is weak, and Putin lost. Okay, when Erdogan had the coup attempt against him, he threw 50,000 people in jail.
Is that right? The Turkish.
That's how many are still in jail. It was more actually at the beginning. There are 50,000 people in jail still in Turkey from 5 years ago or whatever that was. How many people do we know are in jail in Ukraine? I mean, in Russia, Surovikin, and that's kind of it. Putin has been so weakened that he can't even punish these guys who drove a dagger through the heart of his prestige, of his soft power in Russia. And that gets to what I've been saying for a long time, which nobody believes. Everyone thinks I'm being an asshole for saying this. But I think that Prigozhin is who he is. And I think Putin is who he is. And those personalities tend to dominate how people analyze these things. And their personalities matter. But there's a lot more going on here, obviously, than their personalities. Because those are two fight to the death kind of guys. And so what I think is really going on is that Prigozhin was used by and represented a very large faction in the Russian power structure. And that faction decided to renegotiate their relationship with Vladimir Putin. They don't want the Kremlin, because if you go and take the Kremlin, then whoever you put in there as the placeholder has to own the end of the Ukraine war, which nobody in their right mind would want to do. But, and by the way, you also don't want Prigozhin in Moscow, because maybe the people come out on the streets and they don't give a shit what the power brokers have decided to do. They just go and do something totally different. Maybe they burn down all your dachos, right?
Right.
So something happened there where basically they put a knife to Putin's throat. They demonstrated that basically very few people would actually defend him. And then they said, this is what we want. And people are talking about, it's Lukashenko, and that was so smart. Bullshit. I mean, Lukashenko used it in a propaganda manner, I think, quite well. But there's guys like the governor of Tula, a guy named Dayumin, who was all mixed up in all these talks and smart enough not to be in the fucking newspaper for it. He's genius.
What's that? Tulin? Is that a
Dayumin? Tula is this governorship near Moscow in sort of core Russia. Yeah. And he's been a guy, he's a military guy. He's been involved in intelligence. He's an industrialist, kind of guy who does what Putin did. He's got that pedigree and those sorts of smarts, and smart enough to make himself a power player, but stay below the radar. Genius. The guy who's head of Rus. And Dayumin is friendly to Prigozhin. The head of the Rosguardia, a guy named Zolotov, who's head of the Rosguardia. He managed somehow, despite being friend of Putin, to come out of this completely cleanly without ever having had his troops lift a finger to defend Putin. And now he's getting the heavy weapons from Wagner. And Rosneft, nothing's happening to them. Nothing's happening to all these groups that didn't defend the center. And that means that, obviously, Putin had to agree not to do anything about it. And that just, in effect, says Putin is done.
Tacitly.
Bill Browder has a great thing today where he talks about that.
Oh,
and he's like, and Browder's like, it's completely obvious. It's completely obvious that Putin's days are numbered. And I completely agree with that. Russian revolutions always go in twos. There's 1905, Russo-Japanese, and during wars. 1905, Russo-Japanese War. They kind of keep it going until 1917 during World War I. Nicholas II gets outed, boom, dead. 1991, end of the war in Afghanistan. There's still all the repercussions from that. Gorbachev survives. 93, boom, he gets booted out. Now, 2023, in the middle of a losing war, Putin just had a knife put to his throat in a coup. Didn't get knocked out, but I think mostly because there's really nobody yet there's a consensus to replace him with. And so round two, I would say, is 100% guaranteed. And I think it's probably sooner than later. And by the way, I would have said to you before this all happened, I would have told you two things. I would have told you, and I did tell you, there's no way that Prigozhin could really do anything because Putin is so in control of Wagner. But what we discovered was that was wrong because all the FSB and GRU guys had given up on Putin already.
Seemingly.
Weren't willing to defend him.
Seemingly.
Clearly. They were certainly not willing to defend him. Well, if we know that now that's the case, right? before I would have said there's no way Putin gets knocked out, even if he loses in Ukraine. Now, I think there's absolutely no question he gets knocked out if they lose, because they'll just be able to say, all right, it was his fault. That asshole, the old man did it. Boom, he's out. Gayumin, the younger Patrushev's son, Ivanov's son, somebody like that will come in and take over and say, it's time to fix this mess that these previous fools made for us. And that'll be how it ends.
Let me ask you about two other things before I let you go. Domestic politics and everything that's going on with social media. Specifically, obviously, you always love to talk Elon Musk. You have hated him forever. And today it kind of came to a head because Wendy's said something. What did the Wendy's account on I think on Threads made fun of Elon Musk. Wendy's, the burger joint. I'm forgetting it. I got to find it to explain it. And Mark Zuckerberg
and this is
laughed, and then Elon Musk responded to it with "Zuck is a cuck."
Yes.
And that's not the important thing. The important thing is that Mark Zuckerberg's Threads has like 70 million, or probably at this point more subscribers, more subscribers than any other app that has ever been released. Elon Musk escalates his war of words with Mark Zuckerberg ahead of their Las Vegas cage fight. Wait, that's not happening. What was this headline I'm reading? Musk melts down as Threads nears 100 million users. Zuck is a cuck. Elon Musk snipes Zuck is a cuck about Meta boss Zuckerberg after rival Twitter app launch. So my question to you is really about Threads, this launch, and how it's making Elon Musk look as he is name calling at this point and losing. And
Sure. So I don't love Threads. I think it's bad. It's like Instagram without pictures, basically.
Wendy's wrote, "Hey Zuck, you should go to space," just to make him really mad. That's what the Wendy's account tweeted. Sorry.
Right. No, that's okay. So I think Threads kind of sucks, but I'm happy it's happening because it's just, this is the Prigozhin coup attempt against Twitter, basically. Like this is showing that the emperor has no clothes and people are just desperate for anything even good, just good enough, close enough, and they'll all drop it. Musk has destroyed all the things that were good about Twitter. And, I use Twitter mostly as a news thing. I want to connect to people that can tell me things that I'm not going to read the newspaper and that are specialists in their field, et cetera. Sure. It's getting harder and harder and harder to do that. And those people are leaving. I'm on Blue Sky and I'm trying to recreate that on Blue Sky. And, I don't really give a shit if I have 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 followers. Doesn't mean anything to me. But when you look at what Musk did, somebody like me or somebody like you, where we actually produce content, I write things about current events and things that I have a little bit of knowledge of that other people will read and pass on, and people who are journalists will read. That's what people are there for. They're there for that content. Musk just flipped it around and said, no, I'm here for the assholes who pay me $8. And it's the equivalent of like making baseball players play to be pros, right? I mean, it's the equivalent of going to the NBA and saying to the players, no, this is a privilege for you to be out here, right? Like it completely inverts the whole thing. And even worse, he's making the content producers have to pay, one, but then he's also like removing the distinction between people who are complete clowns and people who really have expertise. And mind you, I'm not putting any partisan spin to this. But of course, we all know what's happening there because Musk is actually promoting the right wingers and the MAGA people. Every week it gets a little weirder and a little more MAGA. And I see popping up on my feed guys who are saying like, who was better, LGBT or Nazis? Like you see these like really rank right-wing reactionary shit popping up in my feed where I have no interest in this. The algorithm is obviously forcing it into my algorithm or into my feed because I don't follow that stuff. I don't want anything to do with it. So for somebody like me, I look at it and go, okay, this used to be a lot of wheat. Now it's a lot of chaff. Mm-hmm. And as soon as there's an alternative, then I'm gone. And here's the thing, right? That gets at the whole point of this. Musk came in, he paid twice the money for something that it was worth. He got rid of all the features that the biggest content producers there were bringing to it. And he removed the trust and safety people that made it not a gross interaction all the time. And now anyone else who can do any of those things or all of those things and has the width, the spread, they're going to take all those people. And that's why those 100 million people that have left, I don't know if a lot of them are coming just directly from Instagram.
Right.
But if 40 million of them are from Twitter and never come back, Twitter's done. It's done. And it's interesting, like that thing where Wendy's, a huge buyer of advertising, is totally happy to go onto Threads and say, fuck you, Elon Musk.
Sure.
That tells you the attitude of major advertising buyers, right? That tells you that the mainstream guy writing a check for advertising is like, yeah, this is a good, and Wendy's was probably hoping that Zuckerberg would respond.
Yep.
And so in other words, as Christian Finnegan said it so perfectly, Elon Musk has managed to make Zuckerberg look like the guy you're going to root for in this fight.
Yeah.
And that's fucking amazing.
Amazing. What about the Republican nomination for president? Everybody's talking this weekend and the last few days about Ron DeSantis' inability to launch. Apparently he's brought his wife out and made her a more prominent part of the campaign. People are calling that desperate. But smart people were always saying Ron DeSantis was never going anywhere because he's an extremist governor of Florida. And so I felt like that was always going to be the case. And we've seen this many times before in history. And yet the media really has gone to a certain extent along with promoting him because everybody wants anything but Trump or not. You could easily argue that the quote liberal media does want Trump because he's the easiest to beat. So what are your thoughts on the current state? And I don't like to talk about it too long, too much this many days out, but I guess we're only like 180 days before the first primaries for the Republicans, I think. So what are your thoughts on, Trump's out there. He's on the stump. Where was he this weekend? He was at a fight, UFC fight, where he was hanging out with Joe Rogan and Dana White.
He was in Vegas.
But he's giving a speech somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? Ron DeSantis had an opening, a big one, where he could have presented himself as Trump without all the craziness and all the baggage. And then somewhere along the line, he decided that, no, they needed to be like the Twitter candidate for the right. So they were like hitting memes and they were fighting with people online and, doing all this juvenile bullshit. They promoted a video that is about supposed to give Trump shit for being friendly to gay people. Yeah. And then the whole video is all these thirst trap guys, like naked, oiled up and whatever, like where Pete Buttigieg was like, that's a little gay.
It was a great clip. I played that last week. Yeah, it was great.
Just absurd. And so DeSantis turned out, as most of us suspected who are paying attention, to not be ready for prime time. And so DeSantis is done. Who else is there out there? Christie is going to do himself a lot of favors and establishment Republicans a lot of favors by spending the next X number of months just savaging Trump as much as he possibly can. Yeah. And I can tell you, I know some people working in that orbit with Christie. And Christie is just going to unload on Trump nonstop.
Yeah, it's enjoyable to watch.
And it will, but again, I'm no fan of Christie by any stretch. I can't stand him.
Two things can be true. You can hate Christie because he's a hollow, empty barrel with no integrity principle, was a terrible governor.
Yes.
But you can also acknowledge how effective he is in almost any setting in
That's right.
communicating. He just is. And he knows Trump.
What he's going to articulate the things that Republicans say behind the scenes. That's really what he's going to do. And that is actually a powerful thing because what he's really arguing for is vote Joe Biden. That's the real argument. He knows he can't win. He knows that Pence isn't going to win. Trump is not going to get indicted before the election. So if he doesn't get indicted before the election, he wins.
Well, not going to get
the nomination.
He's indicted. You mean not going to have the trial's not going to be done?
Oh, excuse me. Not going to be tried and convicted. Yes. Yeah. So he's going to be both wings on fire going into the ocean. and Christie's going to make sure he lands or he sinks as deep as possible when he hits. And Christie will regain some sort of societal credibility by doing that. But Trump the base loves him. That's it. There's no, and anyone who thinks differently is crazy. There's no evidence to see that Trump isn't winning, and he's going to win the nomination. And I suspect that when he does, we're going to see national polls that scare us. And then all the state polls we look at are going to make us happy.
Oh, Cornel West is running on the Green Party line.
Yeah, who should be thrown into a fucking volcano, by the way. That's the most fucked up, evil. Like, Cornel West is just another one of these guys like Kennedy and everyone else. Cornel West doesn't give a shit. And this is to all the people who are listening on this, all 11 people that will hear the show.
Thank you.
Cornel West fucking doesn't care about you. He does not care about you. He cares about his ego and about being on TV and about spewing the pattering bullshit that he likes to spew. He is there to be on the scene. And if he turns out to be the one who pushes Donald Trump over the line, he'll take zero blame for the rest of his.
Joining us now, Cornel West.
Yeah, exactly. I can't stand these people. I can't. I knew the people who were around. Oh God,
Jill Stein.
Who helped? Who?
Jill Stein.
No. Going back to the day 2000.
Nader.
Nader. I knew people that worked for Nader, and they said the same thing. They were working for him, and they were like, "This guy doesn't give a shit about the average person. It's about his ego." And that's all these spoilers are. They are all just about their ego. Do you think Robert F. Kennedy?
They weren't always.
Jr. gives a shit.
Ralph Nader wasn't always. Cornel West wasn't always.
He was not. That's right. But they get older and they get used to a ton of attention and a ton of people listening to them all the time. And they, like most smart people who are unchecked in their ego, like Elon Musk, like Mark Zuckerberg, they tend to think that their ability to judge what's happening and what needs to be done, they tend to overthink their ability.
You're so right.
Dunning-Kruger.
You're so right. Yeah. All right. Awesome talk as always. I'm glad we recorded it. I look forward to sharing it, having everybody else hear it. Thank you so much, my
Excellent.
friend.
And let me get I want to get Michael Cohen, Trump's old fixer, to debate cluster bombs. I think that would be great. Oh, I'm sorry. The other Michael Cohen, the journalist.
Is he against them?
He is very much against them, and I would totally debate him, and in a respectful way. I think he's a very smart good guy.
Oh, I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen his comments yet. That's somewhat surprising to me, I suppose. I don't know. Okay, I didn't know that. I'll reach out and see if I can get you guys to go at it this week.
Sure, I would even just go and drink beer in a bar and talk about it with him. I want
to record it.
I want to hear the.
No, thanks. We'll record it. Yep, it'll be fine.
Okay, fine.
You're both firebrands. You're both real firebrands. Be great. All right,
cool.
Thank you, sir.
Your people, my people.
All right, there he goes. Bill Boyle, everybody. Billy Boyle, Bill B in D.C. And go follow him on all the social media networks. Let him know that you heard him. And as always, thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Stand Up. I can't do it without your support. Sign up for a subscription right now. You can always pay a little more, and many of you have, and I notice it and I see it. And I'm sorry I haven't reached out to thank each and every one of you new subscribers and those who have edited their pledge up, but I will do my best to try to get that done this week because I can't do it without you. It's a free podcast, but it ain't cheap. I need your support to keep it going. Thanks to all of you who have given me that support, and I really appreciate it. What else can I say? Well, I want to end today's show with a reading from Pema Chodron's Taking the Leap, freeing ourselves from old habits and fears, which is basically my version of the Bible. I read it all the time and I reread it. In a chapter called Uncovering Natural Openness, she writes, "Nothing is static and permanent, and that includes you and me. We know this about cars and carpets, new shirts, stereos, but are less willing to face it when it comes to ourselves or to other people. We have a very solid view of ourselves and also very fixed views about others. Yet, if we look closely, we can see that we aren't even slightly fixed. In fact, we are as unfixed and changing as a river. For convenience, we label a constant flow of water the Mississippi or the Nile. That's what we call them, very much the way we call ourselves Jack or Helen. But that river isn't the same for even a fraction of a second. People are equally in flux. I am like that, and so are you. Our thoughts, emotions, molecules are continually changing. If you are inclined to train in being open-endedly present to whatever arises, to life's energy, to other people, and to this world, after a while, you realize you're open and present to something that's not staying the same. Maybe that's a lot, but I hope that you're inclined to train in being present. Being present. It's everything. Well, at least to me. All right, Jon Carroll, take us away, brother.
They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for loss, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it is time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Oh, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand